Good morning and welcome. So good to see everyone again. Great. So, for I think we all know each other. If I haven't met you before, my name is Pat Dercoli. I'm one of the co-coordinators of the IRSTE or International Research Symposium on Talent Education, and Kate Enerson. Kate, you want to say hello?
Hello, folks. Nice to meet you or to see you again. Thanks for joining us today, either in real time or on the recording. We're pleased to be back for day 2 of the symposium.
So just a reminder to everyone, each of the speakers will have 25 minutes inclusive of question and answer. And since we're a little smaller group, we'll have, you can raise your hand at the, and we'll moderate the discussion for Q&A. Or you can still utilize the chats if you so desire. Okay? And we're recording, as you all know, and the link for the recording will go out in the announcement for Friday. And if everybody knows to keep their microphone muted so that we can make sure we see all the slides and everything. Okay, so I think we'll begin then. We're going to hear about the development of Suzuki piano in Brazil. We're going to hear about counter stories of 8 Chinese string players and about music performance anxiety and with teenagers. And so let's begin with Isabella. And Isabella is going to talk about the 40 years of Suzuki piano in Brazil.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you this opportunity to be here with you. My name is Isabella Pavan. This presentation, I will present part of the doctoral dissertation named Perspectives on Piano Teaching and Learning by the Suzuki Method in Brazil, defended by me in February of this year in the graduate program in music of the Federal University of Minas Gerais, with supervisor of Dr. Patricia Furtz Santiago. The research investigated the teaching and learning of the piano by the Suzuki Method in Brazil in its historical, philosophical, and pedagogical aspects and its current practice. This was the structure of the dissertation, a part of introduction. First chapter, I talked about Shinichi Suzuki and talent education method. The second chapter, I present the main characteristics of the Suzuki Piano School. The third chapter, the arrival and expansion of the Suzuki Piano School in Brazil. The fourth chapter, perceptions of Brazilian teachers, students, and parents about the Suzuki Piano School. And the fifth chapter, teaching strategies used by Brazilian Suzuki piano teachers. Today, I present part of the discussion I made in the third chapter of this dissertation. The chapter was structured in the following sections: the arrival and diffusion of talent education in Brazil, first, teaching experiences using the Suzuki Piano School in Brazil, the expansion of the Suzuki Piano School throughout Brazil, and the importance of the method in the current Brazilian context. The methodology of this qualitative research include literature review with books and academic works about Suzuki method in Brazil, such as Saito, Pena, Luz, Vieira, Ilari, and Yoshimoto. The data was collected from the SAA, AMS Brazil, the Suzuki Brazilian Association, and from teachers who organized Suzuki piano courses in Brazil. Semi-structured interviews were made with teachers who pioneered the Suzuki piano method in Brazil, such as Maria Helena Pessoa, Maria Inês Scavone Teixeira, Clísis Mulatti, and Rosa Nagal. Questionnaires with 4 Suzuki piano teachers from different Brazilian regions who are currently applying the method. The data analysis of the interviews and questionnaires was a content analysis based on predefined categories with the support of MaxQDA software. So the results, the first section, the principles of talent education arrived in Brazil first in the South region through the work of violin teachers, Sister Maria Wilfred from 1974 in Santa Maria, Hildegard Martins from 1976 in Curitiba, José Carlos Lima e Carlos Alberto Souza from 1980 in Porto Alegre. The 1980s was a decisive period for the establishment and expansion of talent education in Brazil, marked by the arrival of foreign Suzuki teachers, the organization of events that brought together hundreds of students and teachers enthusiastic about the method, and the visit of Brazilian teachers to the United States and Japan to participate in Suzuki training courses and Suzuki conferences. Currently, Brazil has 3 Suzuki teacher trainers, Shinobu Saito, Renata Pereira, e Fábio dos Santos, and the association that currently represents Brazilian teachers is Associação Musical Suzuki do Brasil. Nowadays, it's practically impossible to calculate the exact number of Suzuki students and teachers spread across Brazil. This is due to the fact that not all Brazilian teachers working with the Suzuki method are associated with AMS Brazil or SAA. However, from the SAA data, it's possible to get an idea of the scope of the Suzuki method in Brazil today. In June 2021, Brazil had at least 340 teachers with training recognized by the Suzuki Association of the Americas. Sorry, I forgot you. This figure shows the distribution of Suzuki teachers in Brazil with data collected up to June 2021. In it, we see that the South and the Southeast regions concentrate the largest number of teachers. It's a consequence of the way the method arrived in Brazil and the offer of courses concentrated in these 2 regions. In the second section, we presented the first teaching experiences using the Suzuki Piano School in Brazil. It started in 1982 in Curitiba through the work of teacher Maria Helena Pessoa. From 1986, introductory Suzuki piano courses began to be offered in Brazil. In this, we counted on the presence of teacher trainers such as Beverly Graham, Naomi Picotti, and Nehama Patkin. The first Suzuki piano training course following the SAA regulation happened in 2002 with Carol Cross. The third section, we discussed how the Suzuki Piano School has expanded across Brazil. The courses and the work of teachers who pioneered the method were essential for more Brazilians to learn about and have access to the method. We don't have a Brazilian Suzuki piano teacher trainers yet, so teachers who want to participate in courses need to go to other countries, or we need to foreign teacher trainers need to come to Brazil. The graph 1 shows the countries in which Brazilian teachers were trained until 2011, a period in which courses were held in Brazil. In it, we see the importance of the Suzuki Festival in Peru for the training of Brazilian Suzuki teachers. The most part of the teachers trained in Peru in this period. The teacher trainers who have taught Suzuki piano courses in Brazil are Carol Cross, Caroline Fraser, Flor Canelo, and Blanca Maria Montesinos. Peruvian teacher Flor Canelo stands out as the person who most qualified Brazilian piano teachers due to her recurring visit to Brazil from 2016 onwards. Most of the courses took place thanks to the initiative and organization work of teacher Helenice Villar Rosa, director of the Clavier Music Education Suzuki Center of São Bernardo do Campo. Flor Canelo and the Brazilian teacher Helenice Villar are therefore the men responsible for the great expansion of the Suzuki method in Brazil from 2016 onwards. In this graph, we see that today most Suzuki piano teachers were trained in Brazil as a result of the great offer of courses in Brazil from 2016. Because of that, nowadays Brazil has been experiencing a phase of great expansion of the method, and the Brazilian Suzuki piano community is now is currently growing quantitatively and qualitatively. This graph shows the increasing number of Brazilian teachers who participate in Suzuki piano training courses across the 20 last years. The 2020 bar shows the impact of pandemic in the courses offered. The 2021 bar shows that online courses have facilitated the participation of Brazilian teachers in Suzuki piano training courses. In addition to the impact on the modality in person or online and the intensity of offering training courses, the pandemic also boosted the creation of new types of Suzuki piano events in Brazil and greater interaction between teachers. The National Suzuki Piano Student Meeting has taken place in person since 2017 and had its first online edition in 2021. In addition, online recitals and the Suzuki Brazilian Piano Challenge, 20 days of practice, were held during this period. However, as we can see in this graph, 60% of trained teachers completed only the first level of training, Suzuki Piano Unit 1. Only two teachers completed all the levels of training, up to Suzuki Piano Unit 7. This figure shows the distribution of Suzuki piano teachers in Brazilian states. We observed a concentration of Suzuki piano teachers in the south and southwest regions of Brazil, and that there is still a lot of room for the method growth, especially in the north and the northwest regions. Due to the continental dimensions of Brazil and social economic issues, we believe that the continuity of offering courses in the online format can contribute to more teachers from these regions be able to participate in training courses, reflecting the continued expansion in the method in Brazil. In the fourth section, we see the importance of the Suzuki method in the current Brazilian context. We see that from the perspective of teachers who participate in the research includes, due to its inclusive nature, the method has potential application in the context of Brazilian social projects, which would allow a more democratic access to the piano. The Suzuki teacher training has contributed to raising the quality of music teaching in Brazil and consequently to offering a better quality music education to Brazilian students. And the conclusions, this year marks the 4 years of this method arrival in Brazil. Today, Brazilian teachers have more opportunity to participate in training courses before starting to apply the method. What is significantly different that was happening before. The offer of online courses has facilitated the access of Brazilian teachers to training, especially those who live outside the center-south axis of Brazil. Collaborative work was found to be a peculiar feature of the Suzuki piano in Brazil. This has led to recitals and other events that have brought together dozens of Brazilian teachers and students. Most publications about the Suzuki Piano School are just in English, which make it difficult for Brazilian teachers to access information about the method. Therefore, a greater number of publications in Portuguese would facilitate the access and the qualification of Brazilian teachers. These are the references I used to this presentation. And thank you for the audience and for the opportunity to share and learn with you.
So please feel free to enter questions in the chat if you have any, but because we are a small group today in real time, you're welcome to unmute and speak to Isabella. Perhaps while people are typing, I'll just say, Isabella, congratulations on recently finishing this work.
Great.
Sarah, I see a hand up. Oh.
Okay, my cursor was being like wild. You know how it does that on the computer sometimes. So Isabella, great job. Wonderful. I did have a question about how Brazil is considering to present opportunities of the Suzuki training to those teachers in those untouched areas. Is it because of a language barrier? Is it because of financial situations? Because it did look like where the flux was in big cities, not small cities. So it looked like a lot wasn't available in Brazil. So is there a plan or a theory, or is it that has not been developed yet? I think you're mute still.
Isabella, I'm having a bit of trouble hearing.
Hello?
There.
Are you listening?
Yes.
Okay. There is a wish, I think, of the Brazilian Association to get to more space in Brazil. I think it's a lot of issues like social, economical. It's a great distance to travel, and the flights are expensive to these teachers to go to the areas where the courses normally happen. And because of that, I think the online courses helped these teachers to not expend too much to travel to participate in courses. And I think it's that there's a wish, but it's not so easy to solve the situation.
You mentioned that the online courses help to bring people together and find out each other, and then there were these activities. So were the activities that happened as a result of being in an online course, did they happen in person or did they happen online?
And until the beginning of this year were online, but now next weekend will happen the teachers meeting, Suzuki Pian teachers meeting, that will happen in a hybrid format, online and in person.
Okay. Okay.
Isabella? Oh,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Kate.
it's a new question. So Pat, finish your line of inquiry. We have a moment.
I was just going to say one of my concerns with online training, and I realize I'm coming from the older generation, is the loss of our community value as Suzuki teachers, not the community that we build as teachers and the community that we build as with our students, and our students from various teachers getting together like at institutes and things like that. And you know, like Kate said, we're building the plane as we're flying on it. I think we need to remember that value, because that's such an important part of our philosophy, and figure out how we can use the online to do that. But that's an aspect that I really hope that we can continue to find ways to develop.
I agree with you. I had the opportunity to participate in the two formats, and I still prefer the presential courses.
Yes.
So I know that to some people it's more easier it's easier to participate in.
Yes. Yes.
And our panelists will know we were having a conversation about the merits of an online event for the symposium as compared to an in-person one. And there are some things that we've lost in the shift from in-person meetings to these digital spaces, but there's so much that we've gained by allowing people to gather from all over the world and to watch the videos after the fact. I'll say, Isabella, we had a question in the chat from Lily. Lily, you're welcome to unmute if you'd like to speak with Isabella, or I can read what you've typed.
Okay, I will read out my question.
Thank you.
So my question is, how's the average parent in Brazil learning about the Suzuki method so they feel the desire to send their kids to, like what's the difference between, like how are they learning about it?
I think the most parents don't know about the method, and started to know when the teacher presents it to them. A small part come to us knowing a little about the method, but the work of the teacher is a great one to present and to put on the I'm sorry, I don't know if I can say that, but put the parents within the method, the philosophy.
Okay, great.
Sarah has also added a question to ask about your finding that 60% of teachers completed Unit 1 without continuing on. And she wonders whether the first level is sufficient to teach the method. I had a similar question, which was presumably Unit 1 is offered most frequently. Did you explore how often the later books are available?
I think not. The level 1, the Unit 1 is just a start. I had the opportunity to participate 3 times in the level 1, and I participated until the unit 4, and I think I have a lot to learn yet. And so it's not the first level is not sufficient. As you said, Kate, the Unit 1 course was the more that happened more in Brazil, so it's contribute to more teachers to have access to it, and the other ones are less offered because it depends on teachers who wanted to train to organize these other courses too, and I think in the next years, probably we will have teachers more qualified in the next stages of training too.
Thank you, Isabella. And you did demonstrate that so much of that training has happened very recently. It takes, of course, many years for teachers to work through all of the books. I think for the sake of time, we'll move to our second presentation. Pat, if you'd like to do an introduction.
Sure. Our next presentation will be by Lily Man Lee Long Grant, and she will speak about the counter stories of 8 Chinese American string players. So Lily, you can.
I'm gonna unmute and start sharing.
Okay.
Just give me a shout if I start talking and nobody can hear. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Hello. Thank you for being here for my session. My topic is counter stories of 8 Chinese American string students. To focus my presentation better, I want to actually start off with the implication of my study. As teachers, you would recognize many of these as generally good teaching methods. These include clear assessment criteria for both orchestra seating and selecting students for auditioned orchestras, providing performance opportunities and community building activities. What's interesting is that I found diverse repertoire, including music that is composed by non-Euro-American composers and music from non-Euro-American cultures such as Chinese folk songs, was not a focus for any of the participants. Other implications include having empathy for our Chinese American students and their parents, and celebrating students' identity without essentializing them. I will explain each point in more details at the end of my presentation. Now I will tell you a little bit about myself, because my experience and my points of view, that is my positionality, inform my analysis and findings. I was born in Hong Kong in 1979. I grew up there when it was still a British colony. I currently teach in Glastonbury, Connecticut, United States. I teach 5th and 6th grade students general music, chorus, piano, and occasionally theater. I'm a doctoral candidate at Boston University with a concentration on music education. This presentation is the result of part of my study. When I was in school in Hong Kong, I learned to play the Chinese pipa, which is in the picture there. I played and performed the pipa with various Chinese classical orchestras throughout my school years. So why did I choose this topic? Early on in my teaching, I began to notice a disproportionately high number of East Asians in my school orchestras. For example, in the 2017 and 2018 school year, there were 464 students in my school in total. Out of the 32 students who had East Asian backgrounds, 21 played a string instrument. This means 66% of all East Asian students in my school play a string instrument. To put it in perspective, if 66% of all students play string instruments, there would be 306 members in the school orchestra. Also, out of the 21 students who played string instruments, who were East Asian, 14 was fully or part Chinese in their ethnicity. Most of them play the violin, and some of them play the cello, but none play the viola or the bass. I became interested in the reason for this high concentration of Chinese Americans playing two particular instruments in the string orchestra. One other main reason for my research topic is my daughter, who was born around the time I began my doctoral studies. I want to know how it is like for my students, as well as how it will be like for her to grow up and studying music in the United States. I will now describe my research method briefly. This entire study, from data collection, analysis to presentation, was guided by a qualitative research method called narrative inquiry. After I interviewed my participants, I restoried their narratives to discover meanings. The difference between narrative inquiry and other qualitative research methods, there are many, but the main points is that it's focused on both differences and commonalities of the stories. I am most attracted by this method because I love details in stories, and I often feel that research that only highlight commonalities or norms leave many voices unheard. Narrative inquiry also allowed me to go back and forth between the individual story and the global context, giving me insights to teach better. I will now be quiet for 10 seconds so you can take a quick look at this chart. As you can see, all participants were young adults and they grew up in the US. They were all ethnically Chinese. Most of them majored in STEM subjects, but 2 of them majored in the arts. I will be quiet for 15 seconds for you to look at this next chart. So I found my participants through snowball sampling, with the only 2 criteria being that they have to be ethnically Chinese, and 2, they played a Western classical string instrument in middle school. As you can see, there is a wide range of playing experiences. 6 of them started playing the piano before they began learning their string instrument. I will explain this phenomenon later. My research was guided by a theory called Asian Crit, which is short for Asian Critical Theory. It is an offshoot of critical race theory. Asian Crit contributed to my analysis through two main tenets. One, transnational context refers to the way Chinese immigrants came to the US as a result of various historical events or immigration policies, which affected the demographics of immigrants. Two, Asianization is a concept outlined by Filipino-American researcher Samuel Musaeus, which is, and I quote, the reality that racism and nativistic racism are pervasive aspects of American society, and society racializes Asian Americans in distinct ways. To understand the experiences of Chinese Americans and Asian Americans in general, it is important to view it through the lens of Asian crit. For example, many make the mistake of comparing conditions of Black Americans with Asian Americans. And when they feel that Asian don't have it as bad, they lose interest or nullify Asian experiences. It is not a matter of having it better or worse, but that Asian Americans have different racialized experiences, which is Asianized. Asianization, or the specific processes that Asians are racialized in the United States, could be broken down into these concepts: the model minority stereotype, the perpetual foreigner problem, and gendered Asianization, which includes the emasculation of male and sexualization of female. Here are my findings, and I'll start with the main points. I quickly moved past the idea that there are elements of truth in every stereotype, because stereotypes mask the many untruths as well as the issues that come with these stereotypes. The participants in this study were all aware of the various Asian stereotypes since elementary school. This awareness had in fact affected the decision to start or quit the string instrument in some ways. The stereotypes and other forces affected the participants' sense of identity as Chinese Americans. The struggle to understand themselves racially affected the emotions. So, and I'm going to go a little slow here because there's a lot. I mainly find that being in the string orchestra or playing string instrument and the self-perception of being Asian or Chinese are two factors that influence one another. Although in the past year, so I'm going to start with the smaller points in my findings. Although in the past year, Illinois and now New Jersey have passed bills to mandate the teaching of Asian American history in public schools, these are extremely recent developments. By and large, the history of Chinese immigration into the US and Asian American history in general have not been taught in schools. And why does this matter? Because even Chinese Americans themselves do not have a collective memory of racial oppression and resistance. And here's a very short history of Chinese immigration into the US. Chinese were the first immigrants from Asia to come to the US. The first ones arrived in the 1830s, but larger waves began to arrive in the 1850s. These were laborers escaping unrest and poverty. Unfortunately, shortly before the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, and for 2 decades after, Chinese immigrants were systemically ostracized, they evicted, deported, and killed through various racist pogroms and legislation. During and after the Second World War, the fortune of Chinese immigrants changed because of the United States' desire to show goodwill towards their ally, the nationalist Chinese government. Also, the post-war global economic boom and the Cold War arms race increased the demand for highly educated and highly skilled labor in the STEM field. In 1965, the US government passed the Immigration and Naturalization Act, which encouraged this particular population, the highly skilled and highly educated population from Asia, to migrate to the US. At least one, or in most cases both parents of the participants in my study benefited from this immigration bill, as they were all highly educated and highly skilled. Their jobs included aerospace engineer, IT specialists, and so on, which partially explained the high achievement levels of the first and second generation Chinese immigrants. This group of immigrants have reverence for European classical music, not because it is a universal language, as some might believe, but because of a long history of Western colonialism and imperialism in Asia. They have come to view Western classical music as a source of cultural capital that would allow them to be viewed as more white and more accepted by American society. And they prefer the piano, the violin, and the cello out of all of the instruments because these instruments provided more solo opportunities, and prestige because they're viewed as more difficult. Chinese American students face the perpetual foreigner problem because of white nativism, which is the idea that real Americans look European or white. Our participants realize at a young age that they look different and that they're different than their white classmates. One participant, Ava, was at an elementary school summer camp when she was told by a white girl that she had to get off the swing because she was Chinese. Apart from overt racist acts like this, questions that convey racial microaggressions such as "where are you from" invalidates the American identity of Chinese Americans. This question was asked of every participant in this study at some point in their life, often when they were very little. And it is actually a newer version of the older question, "where are you really from?" which is usually asked of an Asian American when the first question, "where are you from?" did not yield an answer of a place outside of the United States. All participants could speak a form of Chinese fluently, and they are also fluent American English speakers. But this bilingual ability somehow signified that they do not belong because America is such a monolingual country. It seemed contradictory, but the orchestra could act as both a sanctuary or a place where Chinese American students are further cast as foreigners. It could act as a safe space where they feel belong because there are so many other Chinese Americans there. But because there is a stereotype that all Chinese or Asians play string instruments, it further makes them feel less belong. Mass media, as well as Western classical operas, have in numerous instances portrayed Asian men as impotent and Asian women as hypersexual. In professional orchestras, for example, as reported in a New York Times article, a Korean American pianist, female, once had an American conductor describe her as, quote, cheap and good, unquote, and suggested she perform a lap dance in front of the whole orchestra. While the participants of this study did not report or have experienced overt gendered racism when they were young, or have perceived these views in the media, especially after the Atlanta spa shootings. DC said her college professors and classmates ignored her when she spoke in class, but when a Chinese guy talked the same points, he was not ignored. This showed that people might have perceived her as a meek and obedient Asian female to the extent that they could not even hear when she spoke. Janice was heckled numerous times on the streets and called terrible racial slurs because she was an Asian female. John said he wanted to be perceived as hot, which is important because part of the reason why he eventually quit cello in 9th grade was because he did not want to be viewed as the typical nerdy Asian guy. The model minority stereotype is the idea that Asian Americans achieve the American dream by being extra hardworking and focused on academic achievements in STEM subjects. In recent years, this stereotype has been extended to high achievements in Western classical music, particularly in playing the piano, the violin, or the cello. Numerous researchers have pointed out that this stereotype is one way that our society pit one minority group against the other, where Asians are held up as an example to show Black, brown, indigenous people of color, hey, why can't you do it like the Asians? Thereby sidestepping the issues of systemic racism. Ultimately, it serves to hold up whiteness as the most desirable and Blackness as the least desirable status, with Asianness somewhere in between. Within the stereotype, every seemingly positive trait that has been bestowed upon Asians have a flip side that could be used against them when it comes to time for promotion or selecting for musical solos. The flip side of obedient is the lack of leadership potential. The flip side of hardworking is mechanical. Therefore, Asian don't have creativity or sensitivity, the two traits that are highly prized in high-level musicianship. The participant responded to the stereotype differently when they were young. Sharon accepted that she was part of this group of nerds in the orchestra because the mass of Asian students because of the mass of Asian students there. She felt belonged and said, "People in the orchestra were my people." On the other hand, Ella and John were both convinced that they got to sit up front in the orchestra because they were Asian. There is no denying that the participants' parents played a major role in the children's choices to pursue music. For these parents to survive and to gain cultural capital in America, they have used various resources to help their children achieve academic excellence and musical excellence, or at least to start learning music. They also taught their children the native language in my study, which included Mandarin, Cantonese, and Shanghainese. These strategies to survive in turn, unironically, feed into the stereotypes of model minority and perpetual foreigners. There are also obvious differences between acculturation and coping strategies between the participants and the parents, leading to divergent political views, where the parents are more likely to be conservative and the children more likely to be liberal. When the participants were young, they could feel embarrassed by the parents' accents or the food they served at home to guests, but they also develop a sense where they want to protect their parents from racist attacks. Participants also express the desire to repay their parents for the sacrifices the parents made to make a life in America. Before I recapitulate the implications of this study, I want to talk a little bit more about my position in this study. I am the 8th participant and my counter story situates somewhere between my participants who are fully immersed in American culture and my participants' parents who are first-generation immigrants like myself. I feel that I could understand the perspectives and the motivation of both parties. These are photos of my daughter from this past school year. She did a presentation on Chinese New Year at her school, and she also started the Suzuki string program at the High School of Community Division in Harvard this past February. So to recap the implications, first thing is to avoid any suspicions from the students that their seating or admission to a select group is based on racial stereotypes. There needs to be very clear assessment criteria or rubrics that is communicated before and after the playing assessments. Chinese American students felt more belonged in a group where they felt there is a community, regardless of racial makeup. So performances, field trips, competitions, and parties are all great ways for orchestra students to bond and form a sense of belonging. Importantly, as I indicated at the beginning, repertoire was not a focus for any of the participants, showing that they did not feel alienated by a largely white male-centric orchestra repertoire. It might have something to do with the fact that they have assumed or accepted playing an instrument that is of a Western classical orchestra tradition, means that they would be playing the music from that very tradition. I have heard more than once unfortunate comments from fellow teachers that could have shown that they have a stereotypical view of Asian parents, in particular the tiger parenting, or that the students sign them up for way too many activities. Sometimes the teachers could sound positive, such as they would say things like, Asian parents are also supportive. Neither are helpful because, as we have seen, each stereotype could point to a negative image on the flip side. Super supportive could come to mean overbearing, for example. Also, if we assume all parents are supportive, or that we assume that all Asian students are good at music, we might missign that if a child does not have supportive parents or that they're actually struggling. The last one is a little bit tricky, so I'm going to use an example. So the last one is celebrating identity without essentializing, and I will explain what essentialize means. If someone walks into your room with a shirt with what looks like to be Chinese characters on them, going straight for your East Asian American students, do you know what it says? It's an act of essentializing, because um, the students is assumed in this case to have the knowledge of Chinese language just because they have an East Asian face. So the facial features were essentialized, boiled down to the essence of who they are, and that's all they are. But if we hear a student talking in Chinese to the parents, we could celebrate that bilingualism by saying, "Hey, your English is so good. I had no idea you speak another language. How awesome." This way, we're highlighting the knowledge without making it representing the entire self. And actually, that's it for my presentation. I welcome any connections or questions.
Thank you, Lily. That was very insightful.
Thank you.
Anyone would like to ask a question? Or do we have any in the chat?
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, so congratulations on the great study. I really appreciate what you have done.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, I am like on a very similar position as you. I'm a first generation immigrant in the States, and then I have kids who were born in the States. And so, I mean, there's a lot to say, but just two brief things that I was thinking. You mentioned about the parents' perspective, and one of the things that I personally think is because of the information, like especially for like first generation immigrant parents, they are lacking in information about how to raise kids in the States. And so they kind of, rely on what they already have within their ethnic group, you know what I'm saying? So like for Asian parents, because a lot of parents have already done, string instrument a lot, and they know the network, and they have sources, they have teachers, and they have all of that. So it's like really easy for them to approach. I think that's one of the reasons that why we have so many string instrument students. And also, and yeah, that being said, another shift that I recently found is that like right now, like with the popularity of K-pop music like worldwide, now a lot of kids are doing like K-pop dance and K-pop singing and all of that. So what I was thinking is after like 10 years, the trend would be not the same, because when I was teaching actively 10 years ago, I had so many, like as you said, like, I have so many Asian, I'm a cellist, so I have so many East Asian students, but it's not the same like these days. So like there is a trend in terms of the information that parents have access to. So
Yes.
yeah, that's.
So to respond to your first point, part of my findings is that the parents, first generation parents, and to be clear, they pretty much all arrived during the 90s. So we are talking about a very specific generation. And, and the whole thing about the transnational context is that there are different waves. And the whole idea of modal minority is based on this particular wave of immigrant parents. And they do rely on the communities a lot. And my participant talks so much about, oh, my mom talked to somebody and now I have to go to the high school and I didn't want to. So so that's definitely part of that. And I do also see a change in the trends, because some of our students now are like third generation. They are from my generation now, like who or like my students' generation. They're already kind of starting to be they will become parents. And I found that second generation Chinese Americans have, like you said, a lot more information, but also their mindset is very different. Even for my students, they had very little of that what I experienced. You have to pay back your parents, the sacrifices, and you have to take this and this musical instrument and this particular major. Otherwise, you can't major in art. So it's not as stringent and pressurized for even just this group of students. So yes, I think I agree with you. It's like times are changing.
Mm. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily, for that really nuanced consideration. We have a question from Danette in the chat. Hello, Danette. Nice to see you. For the sake of time, would it be okay, Lily, if I let you think that question over to ensure that Sarah can now present? And we have held some time at the end of today's session for general questions. So we'll return to Danette's question after the presentations have concluded in a few minutes. Okay, thanks very much. Okay.
Thank you.
So with that, I think we'll turn it over to our third presenter, Pat.
Okay, so our third presenter is Sarah Lee Michaels, and she will talk to us about music performance anxiety, adolescent musicians, and the private music teacher, and a review of literature. Take it away, Sarah.
Here it comes. So before I begin my topic presentation, indulge me with a little exercise. You can close your eyes if you'd like, you don't have to. But I would like for you to think about the first time you performed music on stage. I want you to think about how old you were, maybe grade school, maybe middle school or high school, maybe even college. Did you sing or did you play an instrument? Did you play a solo or were you with your other friends in band or music? Did you have other musicians playing with you? Were you in front of your friends, your family, your peers, maybe your enemies? And can you remember any of the feelings that you had? Any physical feelings, nervousness, heart beating fast, hands getting sweaty or trembling, stomach feeling queasy? And lastly, did you stress about whether you were going to remember the notes or your words, or maybe forget the whole piece? If you are thinking yes to any of these questions, you were probably experiencing what researchers refer to as performance anxiety, particularly music performance anxiety. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Lee Michaels, and I'm a doctoral candidate at Boston University. I'm also a private music teacher in Connecticut, where I teach private voice and piano lessons to about 30 students a week. And this is my 22nd year of teaching privately. At Boston University, I am currently researching music performance anxiety for my dissertation, in particular, adolescent musicians and the private music teacher. Today, I will be presenting a literature review that looks at music performance anxiety and its relationships to adolescent musicians, the role of the private music teacher, and the unique teacher-student dyad that occurs in private lessons. How the private teacher might serve as a trusted mentor and educator in offering adolescents the guidance, useful motivational skills, wellness tactics, and autonomous support to help them in preparing for performances before, during, and after performances. Let's get started. So this is an introduction and outline of what we will be reviewing. What is performance anxiety? How does performance anxiety affect adolescent musicians? And what factors play a part? The unique role of the private music teacher to adolescent musicians, and supportive and motivational methods private teachers can encourage to help students address MPA in the private studio. What is performance anxiety? Researchers have found that performance anxiety has 4 components. It is psychological, it is physical, it is behavioral, and it is cognitive. And it presents itself among performing artists in a variety of ways, affecting their skills, their occupation, and their life events. It can be debilitating and overwhelming, rooted in physical and psychological reactions to a particularly stressful situation, and in particular with music, a musical performance. Scholars have developed many psychological theories that explain why many musicians experience performance anxiety. It's also known as stage fright. You've probably heard of that. Of course, I've always thought that this name doesn't really identify what we're feeling because it sounds like the stage is frightened, but it's not, it's us. MPA can prompt or mimic fight or flight responses where the body assumes a psychological threat during stress and reacts. Seeger compares it to a social phobia, as both MPA and phobias share high anxiety conditions and similar degrees of cognitive impairment. Zakaria and et al. Describe it as a panic state that causes physiological, physical, and emotional behaviors that sometimes can actually energize a performance as well as thwart a performance. And Kemp went to explain about the 2 psychological categories of anxiety, which is trait anxiety, which is an innate anxious tendency or a genetic disposition, or state anxiety, which occurs more isolative in a particular scenario, and in our case, music. So let's talk a little bit about the adolescent musician. We know that MPA can affect adolescent musicians in all areas, whether we are in the classroom, the private studio, rehearsal, auditions, or stage. In attempting to define, measure, and research MPA in adolescents particularly, researchers are now considering many more avenues. Now the complex interactions between an adolescent's social environment as well as their musical environment. There's a plethora of research regarding MPA actually for the professional musician, the non-professional adult musician, and the community adult musician, yet there is limited research exclusively around MPA and how it affects adolescent musicians. So some of the factors that can affect MPA in adolescent musicians are age, situational environments, and gender. Let's start with age. As we know, adolescence can be a very difficult period in human development for many students. There is a need to understand at what age performance anxiety surfaces and becomes more problematic for adolescent musicians. Researchers have discovered that most adult musicians began music training as early as 12 years old, with some starting private lessons as early as 7 years old. However, research regarding anxiety in the very young musician is rather conflicting. Usher and Ryan studied preschoolers and found that both male and female preschoolers experienced anxiety during their annual concerts. Kenny and Osborne studied pre-K to age 3 and said that there wasn't as much evidence regarding age or gender that they experienced performance anxiety. And yet another study that Paxton and Osborne did said that young musicians as young as 3 may experience some form of performance anxiety. There were suggestions from Kinney and Osborne as well that gender, age, and perfectionistic attitudes, striving for that unrealistic expectation for your performance or practice outcome, definitely influence MPA in young musicians. They also found a direct correlation with MPA and perfectionism in adolescence, and that it increased in young musicians over the years during lessons, auditions, and performances. Steptoe and Fiddler researched orchestral musicians. They included professionals, amateurs, and adolescent musicians. And they examined their levels of stage fright during public performances to determine if it declined when participants performed more often. They found that regarding gender and musical experience, there were no differences. However, they did reveal that adolescent music students had greater levels of stage fright than professional or amateur musicians, which supports the theory that age can be an important factor when dealing with MPA in young musicians. So this is a very interesting area now researchers are studying. They are studying the reactions, behaviors, and social situations that influence adolescents before, during, and after performance opportunities. Music performance anxiety can be present in private lessons, in auditions, in showcases, workshops, school classrooms, music ensembles. There are 4 areas that I found very interesting in my research that these researchers highlighted. Peer watching. Peer watching calls both adolescent girls and boys to have more social, interpersonal anxiety experiences, with girls exhibiting higher level fear, higher elevated rates, and more self-criticism and social reflection. In audience perception, Grotto and Griffiths did a study and evaluated how adolescents view themselves during a performance and what expectations or perceptions comes from audience versus from what comes from themselves. She even evaluated how dress code negatively impacted audience perceptions that evoked teacher and audience disapproval and invited negative gossip, chatter, or distraction during a musician's performance. Expert or teacher evaluation. This is always tricky because, of course, the student values the relationship they have with the teacher. There were biased perceptions with that from observer knowing the performer and assuming the performer was going to do a certain job, or knowing that the student had anxiety, expecting the student to display anxiety when they were singing. So I thought that was very interesting. And then there was observation with teachers trying to find out if they were putting additional pressure on students through high expectations or advanced repertoire or training. So Paxton dealt with studying teachers and how they could adversely affect music performance anxiety with some of their students. And then lastly, personal and musical identity. Guyon et al. Examined some high school students before and during a performance. And he particularly studied a psychophysiological challenge and threat theory. And what that theory did, it investigated whether the challenge, which is a student preparing, studying, taking lessons, their natural talent and resources that they brought to the performance outweighed the threat, which is being on stage in that particular situation and how they gauged their performance. And while his study was rather inconclusive, I thought it was a very valid study comparing the way students are when they're in the studio and then actually when they put themselves on the stage. Researchers agree that the more adolescent musicians perform, the more anxiety level increases. And we've been told that if we practice, if we are prepared, if we keep doing this, it will get better. And study after study showed that that is just not the case. And I'll have to tell you why I put this picture up. I have found from my own personal observations with students in my studio, especially, and when we are in formal performances, that when the cameras go up with the parents on the iPhones, they all choke. They don't perform the same when they know they're being recorded versus when they're just freely performing. And with the age of iPhones, we know how that is. Okay, so let's move on. I don't want to keep with my time. So let's talk about gender. Music performance anxiety presents differently in adolescence in regard to gender, with females often experiencing more anxiety level than males. I will tell you that this is why I began this study. I was more interested when I started reading about performance anxiety, why the studies were focused on women and not men, and why women got more nervous than men. And I'll have to admit, while I haven't answered all those questions yet, it did instigate my study, even though I changed my dissertation topic a little from the very beginning, but I'm still studying performance anxiety and anxiety in adolescence, and that the gender matters. Marked increases in anxiety between both prepubescent and pubescent girls and boys, particularly around 3rd grade, was evident, with girls demonstrating more anxiety than boys. You're going to see this as I continue on gender. Researchers have stated that females were more anxious than males. Age played a part more in females than in males. There's that double factor, age and gender, and that older females were less anxious than adolescent females, confirming again age. Although many researchers concluded that gender difference is not evident in studies, many did disagree. It appears that performance anxiety presents differently in adolescence in regard to gender, with females experiencing more than males. So now we bring in the role of the private music teacher. It seems important to examine the role of the private music teacher, their teaching environment, their pedagogical methods, their studio practices, and how they can bring variables that might positively influence adolescent students about anxieties in performing. So I found that these 2 factors really made a big difference, exploring the trust, communication, and reciprocity that often exists between teachers and students. Researchers acknowledge that relationships between private music teachers and students can be unique and long-lasting. Some consider the private teacher dyad rare among the general teaching profession. McGrath and the other researchers stress the importance of communication and trust in a safe music learning space that encouraged open dialogue between the teacher and the student. Therefore, it seems ideal, an ideal platform for a teacher-student dyad in a private setting to address complex physical and psychological factors with MPA with adolescents. Private music instruction can also provide a platform to talk about the physical changes, the psychological phenomenon of performance anxiety, and explain in detail what happens to our physical bodies, our mental bodies, our thoughts. Private teachers have a valuable impact to an adolescent's personal and musical development by helping them master tasks through motivational skills like self-efficacy and self-regulation. Private teachers know the responsibility that one-to-one training brings, particularly when addressing something like performance anxiety. Paxton found in his studies that teachers often avoid the subject, even though they were fully aware that performance anxiety exists and is part of being a musician. They had a lack of understanding of how to address performance anxiety, often because curriculum, pedagogy, rehearsals, and learning repertoire took priority. He did advise teachers to get adequately trained on how to address the subject, as many music teachers confessed that they seemed unaware or ill-prepared to face these kind of concerns. I was intrigued by one of Paxton's theories, and some of you may be familiar with this in athletics. It's an idea called debriefing. It's a familiar medical and sports coaching support method that works as a proactive post-performance means for both teacher and student. And I thought it was a wonderful idea to instill for performance anxiety, to strategize music students' strengths and weaknesses after a performance. So I found that it was interesting that before, during, and after, everybody thinks after it's over, then you're okay, but that's not the case. Obviously, reducing music performance anxiety in musicians and students is very important. They have that unique opportunity to invite a plethora of proactive and valuable interventions to benefit the students' training, their mental health, and their well-being. Some of Grotto's research included bringing in specialists, medical and musical, which is a great combination to observe performance anxiety, of course, that worked one-on-one with adolescents and offered coping skills, mock audition practices, wellness matters that included meditation exercises, yoga, fitness, Alexander technique, and mental awareness. And private teachers can feel that if they get the proper training, they may be able to address these issues. Nagel believed that private teachers often become mental health resources. And I can say for myself that I've had so many conversations with my own students, more as a psychologist than a music teacher at times. And I do believe that is something that we could be an auxiliary to our students and help students address feelings of doubt or fear or worried about what others think. It is very important for the music teacher to be aware of their role: teacher, musician, role model, sometimes auxiliary parent, and confidant. And understanding that role and encouraging teacher-student reciprocity acknowledges and respects the musician's social and cultural environments, as well as their personal and musical identity, which can ultimately help them overcome performance anxiety. So let's get into the supportive methods: self-efficacy, co-regulation, and self-regulation and autonomous support. Self-efficacy, the definition, the conviction that one can successfully execute the behavior needed to produce the outcome. Bandana's theory of self-efficacy can make the difference between a successful and unsuccessful performance outcome by serving as a motivational skill that helps adolescents find positive, useful, and personal methods that might address MPA. Little research and observation regarding orientation between performance approached goals and learning approached goals in addressing MPA is still needed. So what Bouchard et al. Discovered in college students when they evaluated self-efficacy skills was that they were trying to find out how low pressure environments learning versus high pressure environments when performing a task were observed. And they found that, of course, when achievement among students what happened, there was feelings of confidence and elation, where making arrows obviously transferred as failing and being incompetent. So there was an either or. They hadn't learned that failing or making arrows could be a positive thing. Also, observing the orientation between those performance goals versus learning goals could surmise that a student's personal understanding of a goal might be as impactful as the end result of performing. So music teachers often feel responsibility to motivate their students. A private teacher's goal could be to find individual personal solutions, since they work one-on-one, while asking them about their social and musical identities to help address their anxieties. Communication and co-regulation is important. A student's ability to navigate their own musical journey is vital, but private teachers can offer guidance in that co-regulatory fashion to help support self-regulation and self-efficacy. While adolescents might experience positive and negative feelings, in Sutherland and Southcott's study, it was stated that they often, regardless of how they felt, they often looked to their mentor And in the case of Sutherland's study, it was a conductor to motivate them, and believed that the mentor's leadership could positively or negatively affect their post-performance euphoria or anxiety. And my last section is an autonomous support. Researchers believe that student autonomy is beneficial to adolescent musicians. It seems important to observe the private teacher-student dyad, the reciprocity that that dyad encourages, how the dyad addresses particular learning avenues, including MPA, and offer autonomous support in the private music lesson. And I want to share with you, because I know we are in the Suzuki seminar with violin and cello teachers and voice students, now that I've learned that is there too. And I wanted to share this example of autonomous support that Cooper's et al. Did, studying co-regulation and student autonomy. So Cooper's study found some very interesting results, and I'm going to highlight 4 of them. That autonomous support can be reciprocal and negotiable. That number 2, that non-engagement negatively affects independent learning and discourages reciprocity. That opposition, number 3, and resistance in a private music lesson helps to find autonomy. And I have found this myself personally. And 4, adaptation and synchrony encourage wellness and healthy outcomes, and can be very helpful for addressing conditions like performance anxiety. Such factors could prove valuable to a private teacher so that they might help guide their students' musical learning and development, both individually and independently. So the role of the private teacher and the student-teacher dyad seems to be an important factor in my study for opening communication with students about anxiety during their performances, after their performances, and before their performances. Private teachers have that unique opportunity, that one-on-one relationship that they can help co-regulate a musical journey. They can expose skills like self-regulation, self-efficacy, and offer autonomous support for personal and musical growth. However, the one thing that seemed obvious throughout is that it is necessary to adequately train music teachers about better ways to address MPA in music training. And because there's inconclusive evidence regarding the track threes, more research is needed to understand the exact roles that age, gender, and social environments play. 4 points that we can finish with is how adolescent musicians interpret performance under pressure, what accurate and applicable methods are useful for adolescents, the role that the private music teacher plays in addressing MPA, whether it's private instruction or public institution, mentor or coach, and what social and situational factors most influence performance anxiety in adolescents. And my references. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Congratulations. That was great overview. Something of great interest to me, that's for sure. Does anyone have any questions?
We do have a question in the chat from Danette. Danette, you're welcome to unmute if you'd like to ask, or I can read it out.
All right, thanks. I was just so surprised to hear that the repetition and the familiarity and the more that they perform wasn't a factor in helping reduce the anxiety. Is there any speculation as to why?
Well, this literature review did not have the answers to why, as much as that the facts stated that this is what it was. And it's interesting you say that, because I was obviously curious too. And even when I did research for this, and I would see these things pop up, 5 ways to avoid performance anxiety. And every group of things that I would read would say, practice, continued practice, make sure your repertoire is, and while that is present and actually necessary, or performing more, that was the other one. It doesn't change the fact that anxieties happen uniquely, and that people that have innate anxieties, no matter how much they're going to practice and they come to the table, they're going to be more anxious because they're already anxious people, possibly. So that could be one reason that might not be so true, even though I know our music educators say practice, be prepared. And I totally agree with that, because we know that one of the first things that causes performance anxiety is not to be prepared. There's nothing worse than not knowing what you're going to be doing, right? So when you've got that out of the way, then you can present your music, but then another element of things come in. So I thought those two things were very interesting. Practice more and get in front of people more often. And studies showed that that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have less performance anxiety.
Lily, I saw your hand up. Did you want to weigh in?
I want to weigh in, and also I have a question.
Yes.
Just, I wonder if the more practice means more anxiety is related to the fact that females feel more anxiety, because as a society we are socialized to be more critical of ourselves, and as you get more familiar with your instrument, you become more aware of all of the mistakes, and you just, because I suffer from pretty debilitating performance anxiety as a young person, and I'm so intrigued by like what you found, like about the female being more having more anxiety. So I was just wondering if we could, like, in the future, maybe find literature about the relationship between knowing more and being more critical of yourself.
Great.
So, yeah.
Yes.
And
Well,
my question is, what does I love the idea of debriefing after the performance. What does it look like? Do you do it right away? Do you wait a week? Like, what does it usually, like, what do you suggest it should look like?
I think that from what I read, and I've been doing some research on this and will include this in my dissertation because I think it's so interesting too. And it offers new methods. And I think that's what we're looking for, because some of the tried and true that have been around aren't necessarily working, or there are new issues. And I think that our world is more anxious than ever. So some of these things that worked before might not be working now. But I like the idea of the debriefing. And some of the studies had various things. Some of them had right away, that the mentor, the coach, the teacher would meet with the student right away and talk gently about what happened. But sometimes they would do it a day after the performance, after the wind down, so that you could learn, but take that information and use it for the next performance. And I think that's what the ultimate goal was, is to learn, discuss, not into a negative context, never in a not negative context, because we never know how that's going to react to a child, or an adolescent, but to take that information and use it. So there were different things, but from the readings, it seemed like the next day, because it's awfully hard to talk to somebody unless they need that assistance right after a performance, right? Because things happen. But I found that interesting with your study about women, and this was something that I started years ago, actually 4 years ago, when I started my dissertation information, and I was very intrigued about the women as well. It also said that couldn't get to everything, but it had incidences of women. There was one study that the same women came out in 4 different outfits, and she sang the exact same way. And only the one that was in black concert outfit was awarded the highest scores. She came out once in short jeans and a top, and she was scored very negatively, even though she sang exactly the same. And the other one was in a casual outfit. So it was just very interesting how evaluations and judgments were placed on women that were not placed on men. And then another one was, let me think of the other one, I can't remember, but it was a lot of studies about just that women were more prone because of perfectionism as well, and wanting to be right or do it right. So I think we all know that perfectionism stems in music in general, a little bit, that we have to deal with that in performance anxiety as well.
Mm-hmm. I'll interject here. I'm mindful that we have 5 minutes left in our allotted time for today. I said we would return to the question for Lily if we had time, I wonder, Pat, if you'd like to just say a couple of words about Friday's keynote and our wrap up in case there are people with a hard stop at 1:30 who need to jump off the line. And then I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if people would like to keep the ball rolling on the sort of semi-structured discussion.
Okay, sure. Let me just say that on Friday, we have our keynote speaker, Dr. Karen Hendricks from Boston University, and she'll be talking about exercising empathy the Suzuki way and the role of empathy in music education. I think it goes a lot with what Sarah was talking to us about, or is a great follow-up for that. And while I will be sending out the link again for today's recording on Thursday afternoon, that will also have the link for Friday, but the link, any link works for any day. Also, a number of you have asked about making a donation. The web page is down right now for UWSP. Hopefully, it will be up again by Friday. If it is, I will include that link in case you would like to make a donation if you weren't able to for the research symposium as you're part of volunteer registration. And I think that's all that I need to say. Thanks to each of you, Sarah and Isabella and Lisa, or Lily, excuse me. We really appreciate you speaking today and hearing about your work, and wish you all the best. Okay, so we can stay on now if you'd like to continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, Lily. So the question for those who might have missed it was from Jeanette in the chat to say, Lily, do you have specific changes that teachers might be able to make in their studios about how the studios are structured, the language that's used, any more concrete guidance?
Yeah, with regards to studio, I think it's so great when you can build a one-on-one, relationship with your students. We as classroom music teachers don't have that luxury a lot of times. So I would say just listen to the stories if they're willing to share, get to know who they are really, and be specific with ethnicity as much as you can, and be cognizant of particular political affiliations. For example, if you have a Taiwanese student, avoid calling them Chinese, because while it doesn't offend every Taiwanese, like they're usually, if they call themselves Taiwanese, kind of stick with that. So it's not the same thing. As far as language goes, I think language kind of goes with all the teaching, everybody who teaches. So I would avoid language that exoticize. So like in general, I don't like terms like multicultural or ethnic, or that when it comes to mean non-white European. Just saying music or classical music when you mean Euro-American classical music. So the simple remedy is to qualify all music. So in my presentation, you heard me say Western classical music a lot, instead of just saying classical music. European string instruments instead of just saying string instruments, because I myself play a Chinese classical string instrument. So for me, it's kind of easy to switch that in my brain. And along the same way, don't just oppose Americans with Chinese Americans, but use European Americans or white Americans with Chinese Americans. So kind of be careful with that language, because a lot of times Chinese Americans ourselves have come to think that we don't belong, because everyone just means Americans as white Americans. So I hope that makes sense.
Great.
Thank you, Lily, for those really concrete suggestions to decenter whiteness and Western music and North Americanism.
Thank you.
We have a few more minutes if there are other questions people haven't had a chance to ask yet or to put in the chat. It has been such a pleasure having you all here today, and I hope you'll be back for Friday's keynote session with Dr. Hendricks. Okay, I think we will then return everyone back to your very full days in the middle of the week. Thank you for coming together with us and spending this time. Pat?
Thank you as well, and we look forward to seeing you on Friday.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.